The world had devolved into a goth night out that never ended. Instead of nuclear fire, we got what I like to call sparkle fangs. Fast, pasty, criminally allergic to sunlight. I'm Adam, a former Navy SEAL whose finely tuned survival instincts had, unfortunately, included a lifetime aversion to crowds, making the apocalypse strangely manageable. My training, which once involved scaling oil rigs and navigating hostile waters, was now mostly applied to making sure my socks were dry, and that I hadn't forgotten a single roll of toilet paper I'd scavenged. 6 months. 6 months of blissful, solitary hermitage in the high Rockies. My only company was a cranky marmot I'd named Gary, and the constant nagging fear that I'd accidentally leave my canteen outside overnight and have to chip it out of the ice. Then came the whimpering. It sounded like a disgruntled kitten. My first thought, fueled by months of paranoid isolation, was that it was a highly elaborate, whining vampire trap. I crept through the spruce, rifle in hand. When I finally found the source of the noise, I almost fired off a round, expecting an attack. Huddled under a tree was a woman, shivering so hard I thought she might vibrate right out of her parka. She looked mid-20s, terrified, utterly miserable. "Hey, easy there," I said, lowering my rifle. "I'm not a sparkle fang, see? I'm wearing sensible wool. I haven't tried to rush in for a nibble." She just stared, and her eyes wide and wet, and I cautiously approached. "Are you alone?" She nodded rapidly. "Hurt?" She shook her head, then pointed dramatically at her throat and made a zip motion with her fingers. And she sighed, a small, frustrated puff of air. A mute. In this nightmare, a person without a voice was basically a free sample for the night feeders. This poor woman was a definition of low-hanging fruit. "Okay," I said, rubbing my temples. "My name is Adam. Like the first guy, except I'm mostly concerned with good fire discipline, not fig leaves." I gestured toward her. "What's yours?" She fumbled, producing a scrap of paper and pencil stub that had clearly seen better days. Her hand shaky, she scrawled a single word. "Sarah." "Sarah. Right. Well, Sarah, the mountains are lovely this time of year, but the locals have an aggressive snacking habit. You're coming with me." She looked at me, then at the rifle, and back at me. I could almost hear her thought process. This guy seems dangerously competent, but possibly insane. She pushed herself up and followed. My cave was a masterpiece of SEAL ingenuity and paranoid hoarding. It was perfectly camouflaged and had multiple tripwires, mostly just tin cans and fishing line, but they worked, and was stocked with enough deer jerky to choke a small bear. "Welcome to the Addams Family Vacation Home," I announced, sweeping my arm dramatically towards the damp, rocky interior. I call it the cozy, mostly because it's slightly less cold than outside. Sarah, exhausted, managed a weak smile as she took the offered water and deer jerky, which I'd affectionately named Bambi Bites. In the following days, our communication developed into a complex, silent comedy routine. I tried to teach her my SEAL hand signals, but she kept confusing the danger sign with the "I need more jerky" sign, a desperate clawing motion. "No, Sarah, if you do that, I think of vampires coming to steal my protein," I'd said, demonstrating the actual danger signal again. She'd roll her eyes, a remarkably expressive gesture for someone who couldn't speak. She, however, was a phenomenal spotter. Her silent terror had apparently sharpened her senses to superhuman levels. One afternoon during a highly unsuccessful deer stalking mission, I was convinced the deer had developed some kind of post-apocalyptic radar. Sarah suddenly stopped dead, planting her boot firmly on my toes. I winced, then saw it. 3 of them, lurching through the lower slopes. They looked less like menacing hunters, more like a high school emo band that hadn't seen the sun in 3 years and desperately needed chapstick. 3. The worst number. Always avoid prime numbers, Sarah. I immediately motioned and back up quietly. We began our retreat. Sarah, usually light-footed, accidentally kicked a small stone that skittered loudly across the ice. The sparkle things stopped. Their heads swiveled in unison. "Oh, come on! They heard that?" "Their hearing is apparently better than their skincare regimen." I grabbed Sarah. "Run! And try to look less tasty for a minute." I winked, and she smiled. We bolted. My training kicked in, filtering out the panic. I spotted the crevice, a perfect choke point. "In there, now!" I pointed, making the universal go fast and don't get eaten gesture. Sarah scrambled inside. I turned, rifle up, just as the first 2 vampires appeared. They moved with unsettling speed, hissing. I fired, missing the head of the first one. The third one, the smart one, moved to flank me. That was it. I had to make a move. "Okay, Sarah, time for Operation Spicy Rockfall." I pulled the pin on my last fragmentation grenade. As the flanking vampire lunged, I tossed it directly into the cave mouth, aiming not at the vampires, but the unstable ceiling. I dove deep into the cave as the explosion ripped through the air, followed by the terrifying scraping sounds of tons of rock collapsing. Dust filled the air. My ears were ringing so badly I thought I'd permanently lost my hearing. "Sarah, give me the 'we survived' signal." I flashed my light desperately around the cave. Finally, the beam landed on her. She was covered in grit, but she was okay. And she didn't use the "we survived" sign. Instead, she used the "I need more jerky" sign. Then pointed a dusty finger at the enormous pile of rubble blocking the entrance. I sighed, managing a weak grin. See, I knew that sign was important. "All right, Sarah, you survived an explosion, a rock slide, and my awful jokes. Now we need to find the emergency exit, because this place is starting to smell like burnt vampire with low self-esteem." She nodded, giving me a silent thumbs up. We crawled out of the narrow secondary fissure 2 hours later, looking like chimney sweeps. We reached a high, remote plateau just as the sun set. It was barren, exposed, and absolutely perfect. No vampire would bother climbing this high. They preferred the easy pickings of the lowlands. As I began the tedious work of digging a new, heavily reinforced dugout, and Sarah pulled out her paper and pencil and started drawing. This time she drew a portrait of me. I looked rugged, handsome, and slightly heroic, which was generous considering I was currently covered in mud, complaining about a splinter. But next to my head, she didn't draw a halo. She drew a small, crude speech bubble. Inside it, she wrote a single word, followed by a question mark. "Jerky?" I laughed, the sound echoing across the silent mountains. "Yes, Sarah," I said, pointing at the drawing. "Jerky, and maybe some better sound discipline, but mostly jerky." We were a mess of mismatched survival gear and emotional baggage, but we were here. Adam, the former SEAL with a penchant for dry wit, Sarah, the silent muse whose eyes spoke volumes. The apocalypse had been brutal, but it had brought us together, and honestly, the vampires could suck it. Now, if you'll excuse me, I announced, shouldering my shovel, I need to get started on the camouflage perimeter. It's critical for our continued existence, and frankly, I need to work off all those Bambi bites. My uniform is getting tight. Sarah gave me a loving, silent shake of her head. We finished a new dugout, a hidden marvel of rock and snow I dubbed the penthouse of paranoia. It was small, meticulously organized, and protected by so many redundant tripwires I could barely navigate it in the dark. One evening I was patching up my oldest fleece, a losing battle against entropy, while Sarah tended to our small, carefully guarded fire. She was studying me, not with the calculating gaze of a partner assessing threat levels, but with a new, quiet warmth. She picked up her pencil and paper, sketching quickly, and she slid the unfinished drawing toward me. It was a cartoon atom, a stick figure with an impressively rendered tactical beard, surrounded by various stick figure vampires, running away in terror. Underneath, she wrote, "Security system, 10 out of 10. Then she drew a second picture. It was just two small, slightly lopsided stick figures, Adam and Sarah, huddled under a tiny drawn blanket. Beneath it, she didn't write a word. Instead, she gently traced the heart symbol she had drawn between the figures with her finger, then looked up at me, her eyes soft and vulnerable. My hand, usually steady enough to thread a needle while skydiving, felt suddenly clumsy. I cleared my throat, feeling a blush creep up my neck that hadn't been there since I was 13. Right, tactical bonding, essential for morale. Good work, Sarah. Very efficient. I grabbed a piece of wood and threw it on the fire, avoiding her gaze. It felt like I was 15 again. My brain was failing to process a simple compliment. She just smiled, a knowing, patient curve of her lips that made me feel like an idiot and a hero all at once. The next morning, we were checking our perimeter when we heard it. It wasn't the high-pitched shriek of a vampire or the whimpering of a victim. It was the steady thump, thump, thump of a helicopter. I dropped instantly, pulling Sarah down with me. No one uses air support anymore. It's too loud, too risky. We watched, absolutely still, as a large military-grade transport, painted in dull snow-white camouflage, flew low through the valley. But it wasn't just a transport. It was fighting. We saw a burst of bright white light, not sunlight. Something intense, focused, flashed out from the helicopter's side. Moments later, a plume of smoke rose from the dense woods below. "Did you see that?" I whispered, scrambling to get my binoculars. "That looked like a UV pulse cannon. They're actually bringing hardware." I focused the binoculars on the ground where the plume of smoke was rising. I saw flashes of movement, 2 or 3 vampires scattering, but then a squad of figures in white and gray tactical gear dropped from the chopper on fast ropes. They moved with terrifying speed and precision. They weren't fighting defensively. They were hunting. One of the figures raised a weapon, not a standard rifle, but something bulky, tipped with what looked like reinforced silver. He didn't fire haphazardly. He aimed, and waited for a vampire to round a tree and put it down with a single, devastating shot. Sarah nudged me and pointed to a small insignia visible on the side of the helicopter, a stylized sword piercing a black, angular wing. I lowered the binoculars, my mouth dry. They're organized. They're equipped. That's not just survivors. They're an army. For 6 months I had assumed every human force had been wiped out or scattered into desperate, starving gangs. Seeing this coordinated assault felt like waking up from a long, terrible dream. We spent the rest of the day watching. The squadron systematically cleared the section of the valley, their movements ruthlessly efficient. They didn't leave until the last of the vampires were gone. That night, back in the penthouse, the fire felt warmer, the silence less heavy. This changes things. I told Sarah, drawing the map in the dust again. I circled the area where the helicopter had been. They're clearing the valleys. The tide is turning. This isn't just about surviving anymore, Sarah. It's about joining the fight. I looked at her, searching for the old fear. It wasn't there. Her eyes were bright, focused on the map. She picked up her pencil, quickly sketched 2 things. A vampire, drawn looking particularly miserable and pale, getting staked by a tiny stick figure. And a large map with an arrow pointing down the mountain towards the valley. Then she tapped the drawing and looked straight at me, pointed to her chest, then to mine, then made a decisive walking motion with her fingers. We go together. I grinned a wide, genuine grin that felt foreign after months of grim expressions. You're right, we're going. We need to find out who they are and how we can help. A good SEAL never misses a cleanup operation. I packed my rucksack with renewed purpose, feeling the familiar adrenaline surge of a mission, and not just survival. I looked at Sarah, who was expertly checking the ammo count on my spare magazines. You know, I said, slinging the rifle across my back, if we find civilization, I'm finding you a whiteboard, and maybe an actual uniform. We are going to be a highly effective, severely undercommunicative reconnaissance team. She walked up to me, her hand reaching out. She didn't use a hand signal. She simply took my hand, lacing her fingers through mine. A simple, deeply human gesture of shared commitment. She squeezed once, her silent promise to follow, to fight. I squeezed back. All right, Sarah, let's go see what happens when humans decide to stop hiding and start fighting.